Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play StarTropics 2. In the last one we started off the game getting through the first 2 chapters because of how many cutscenes the first chapter was, and now we're in the cave heading east to find ourselves some pizza in ancient Egypt. It makes sense in context. No, it doesn't. Now, if you didn't trade in the axe at the Jack of all trades hidden behind that one wall at the end of the last part, I recommend going to do that before this dungeon because this dungeon really showcases the weaknesses of the axe in its lower range and damage, just straight up. Not being able to hit 3 tiles ahead of you is a pretty dangerous thing for this stage. But we do find ourselves a new ammunition-based weapon here, the slingshot. I want to say that's about the same strength as the basic axe, but it just has a much wider range than anything else, and I want to say you can fire it faster. I'd recommend holding on to your ammo until the boss fight with that before you let loose, because its range is much more useful there than it is during the main dungeon portion. Speaking of which, in this particular dungeon, the Cyclopses are basically the same as the bears from the last chapter, and these porcupines just kind of roll if they make eye contact with you while you're perpendicular to them. Meanwhile, the scorpions just fire occasionally, pretty easy to jump over. Now, a moment ago, we saw a quality of life update for StarTropics 2. Like StarTropics 1, basically every dungeon moving forward is going to have panels that are used to open doors in some form or another, or make items spawn. In StarTropics 1, you had to jump on every single panel to find the one that actively worked, because there was no indicator of which one worked otherwise, unless you just memorized it from prior playthroughs. Here in StarTropics 2, not only do you not have to jump on the panels, unless you're activating it, you can just walk on top of them, and if they make a sound/glow, that's the one that can be activated. Otherwise, they just kind of do nothing. So finding which panel you need for puzzle solution is infinitely easier in this game. It's more so just a time saver than anything, because it really was just jumping until you found the right one after you've killed every enemy in most cases back in the first game, but yeah, I'll take any time save I can get. Also, I do like these little invisible enemies. Their sprite is just a part of the textured floor, and there's something about that that's really just kind of original for the time. I can only remember a few other games that have done that, period. Usually, if they want to make an enemy invisible, they'll just make them like an outline that shows up every now and then, or do the flickering thing. Outright using the floor texture, that's a little different. Be careful in instances like this, though, because sometimes you have to make some jumps over bottomless pits, and if you fall into those, instant kill. Thankfully, I think every dungeon starting from this one has at least one checkpoint littered in it, unless it's like 3 screens long. Usually indicated, I think, by either music change or something else. So you're not entirely out of luck like you were in StarTropics 1 in most cases, where a death sent you usually back to the start. But be careful all the same. Thankfully, you can't outright walk into bottomless pits in this game, or water for that matter. If you hug the sides, in most cases you'll just kind of stay at the side, unless you try to jump. The only instances that's not the case is usually when you're on something like a platform or a raft over the bottomless pit. By the way, boss fight for here is this King Scorpion. It moves around semi-randomly, occasionally does a little rage fit, and makes a contra-spread shot in your general direction you can jump over as usual. The bigger annoyance in this fight isn't even the King Scorpion, it's the babies. Because they spawn in relatively rapidly, and they always try to home in on your location, and you can get yourself into some pretty tight corners, either with them surrounding you, or with you between them and the boss when it's about to fire, making jumping a little uncomfortable. Is it a very hard boss? Not really. But for the point in the game it's at, this is a lot to keep track of, so if you end up taking some deaths here, don't be too surprised. I think, on average, in StarTropics 2, I tend to not die until the dungeon at the end of this chapter, for the issue I brought up a moment ago, where you can walk off only specific platforms in the game, and I often forget that, or I just miss a jump. And that's that dungeon over with. So let's go see if we can find ourselves a pizza. Oh, hello there. Nice camel. Hey, buddy, where you headed? Blah, blah, seeking pizza, blah, traveling, blah, blah. Pizza, that's the hot cheesy pie from Rome, right? Try rent a camel for a smooth ride. I have no currency, but sure. Have a nice drive. We hop on board the camel, and ride, 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 and ride for a very long time. Look, someone's coming! Hark, traveler! Have you seen a bathroom around here? Because I really need to use one. Hey you know the way to the Nile? I've got a special delivery. A large pizza with extra pepperoni for our best customer. Blah, blah, singing pizza, blah, Cleopatra, blah, blah. Okay, I'll leave it to you. Thanks a lot, pal. We've got a pizza! Bye now. Why is that moving so fast now? No wonder you took forever. You're on a Koopa Troopa. No time to waste. Run, run, hurry, hurry. Run, run, hurry, hurry. You arrive at the barge. The pizza's still warm. Well, I would hope so. It's a desert. If anything, it's a surprise that it's fresh at all, but let's not question logic too much in an NES game about children adventures. You've returned, and you have the pizza. Quick, give it to me before it cools. We hand her the pizza. Can I have a slice of that? I'm hungry. I haven't eaten in 3 days. Chomp chomp, chew chew. Eating sounds, eating sounds. More of that. No, you're eating this pizza pretty quickly. And I do like this little weird joke about combining Little Caesars and Pizza Hut, by the way. I don't know why. It's simple, but it's charming. Mmm, delicious. I'm so happy. Come closer, Mike. Okay. Hi. She is a knockout! Let me take you to the Tetrad, okay? I remember when I first played the game, I questioned why we needed a barge to cross the Nile. It's a river after all. That was before I knew that apparently at its widest, the Nile River's about 2 miles wide. So, yeah, maybe you need a barge for that point. To the south, you'll find a great pyramid. The Tetrad is rumored to be within its walls. Bravely face the dangers of the pyramid and you'll reach the Tetrad. Good luck on your journey. Hell yeah. One thing I do like about StarTropics 2, just like StarTropics 1, it actively saves pretty regularly. I think you still need to do on the NES the old reset while before turning the power off thing, just to make sure the save is, there, but I like it when an NES game has a save feature, and I like it when it has an autosave even more. Alright, let's head into this pyramid and go get that Tetrad. And if you want to, you can actually restock on hearts here permanently by just leaving and re-entering the place. I'd recommend doing that in most cases, honestly. Because it saves between every single time, so you just save your amount of hearts. And that's a wall. Well, I guess we're not getting the Tetrad. The world is doomed. For whatever reason, the world is doomed. You need something special to cross the pyramid's magic field. Would have been nice to know that beforehand. I came from the north. Some strange magic going on up there. Now, I'm not sure if you need to go to the Great Pyramid before you head up north. I want to say you might have to. It's very StarTropics of itself if it does that. But if you can, I guess it might be worth a try. Just skip that little, 2 minutes. Not even. There's a mad magician in a field beyond the reeds to the north. I was up there. He was driving me bananas! Okay. So this is a bit of a fun little dungeon. Monkey. Must chase monkey. So this is a maze, but you can't see the pathway unless you stand on one of those platforms to see above the reeds. So at that point, it's either an amount of drawing the pathway in front of you that you can see, and memorizing which ways you can go. Or, you take the third option and have a map up, because there's no way I'm memorizing a maze this large. And right there, I think, is our first real heart container that we'll be grabbing in a moment, because there's also a couple of pitfall traps here that you need to encounter to go through some smaller dungeons. Something I do like about StarTropics 2, and a little bit in StarTropics 1 as well, now that I think about it. They kind of play with what a dungeon is for a game of its type. Like, usually a game like this, the dungeons would only be like this combat stuff. But they have a couple where you're actively just walking around as Mike and just exploring. I like it a lot. Now, a moment ago, we saw, I think, our first star in the game. Stars are returning from StarTropics 1. You pick up, I think it's 5, and a heart gets restored. But they're extraordinarily rare, it feels like, in this game. more often than not, you will not get enough when it matters to really use them. And I feel like they only really spawn commonly here in chapters 3 and 4. At least that's what it feels like. I'm not sure if later chapter enemies just drop stars less commonly, or if only certain specific types of monsters can drop them. Either way, they definitely feel like they're a lot less common the further in you get, and they're already not too common to begin with. Kind of makes the fact that they're counted next to your lives and potions a little bit weird. But as I was saying before we fell in there, right over there we got our first big heart, not even a heart container. You can actively progress through the game without completely maxing out your life counter, because there's a couple of hearts you actively have to go to your way to find. Usually they're, honestly, very easy to find. There's only one I'd say that's kind of weirdly hidden. But they're worth getting because if you can take an extra hit, it's going to help you in the long run. Less so than it did in StarTropics 1, though. Because something I like about StarTropics 2 is how the weapons work. In StarTropics 1, basically every single weapon you got as an upgrade reverted to the lower level if you lost enough health in a stage. But it would also revert back to its higher stage if you gained health back via using a potion or whatever healing items you had. Here in StarTropics 2, the dagger will always be the dagger and will never revert to the axe. There is still a weapon type in the game that does more damage the more health you have, but compared to the weapons in StarTropics 1, there's fewer stages to begin with. And those stages have wider health requirements, so you have a little more leeway with how much health you can take without losing your main damage source later in the game. We'll be talking about that more in depth later this very part, actually. The dungeon portions of this dungeon, though, as redundant as that sounds, aren't too bad. There's health littered all over the place from memory. And a lot of the enemies are pretty slow. The hippos are probably the most annoying because their shots home in at a pretty decent rate, and that's a really badly missed jump. You do have a lot more control over Mike in mid-air than you did in StarTropics 1. You're not locked to tiles for one, but you can actively jump diagonally pretty reliably. In fact, there's a speedrunning trick known as a void jump I have no idea how to do that actively allows you, if you get like hit while jumping in a certain way, to stand on bottomless pits, and you can use that to make some shortcuts in some dungeons. Some is a keyword, not every. Actually, now I think about it, what is the speedrun record for this game at the moment? Any percent's the only category. It is currently... Tantalus is 58.59 from about a year ago. That's from memory about the same length as StarTropics 1, so I guess there maybe is more flags in this game preventing you from doing stuff than I thought there was. It's honestly kind of impressive that an NES game is as solidly programmed to make it at that long as it is. Usually NES speedruns, especially if they find a way to do a wrong warp or like. I'd say on average about 20 minutes or less, 30 at the longest in most cases. Then you get the RPGs, that's where things get a little funky, because either those are 3 hours, or 3 minutes, it feels like. I mean, that's a lot of a game's period, I guess, but like the NES was especially filming stuff like that, partially just due to a lack of quality control in some cases. The mazes can also be relatively easily felt out if you have a lot of grid paper. It just takes a lot of time to memorize it. Welcome, Mike. I've been expecting you. I'll be a monkey's uncle. Listen well, there's a special ability that I must give to you. It is the power of the mind. We've got a brain now! With this force, you'll be able to break barriers and strike down your enemies. Now be gone with you! Alright, so I guess now we can go do the pyramid. Hell yeah. Hey, wait a minute, before we go into the pyramid, you may have noticed there was a little snaky friend outside, and they actually have an important hint for us. Psst, psst, let me tell you about the pyramid. I snaked into there once and was charmed by a very catchy tune. That is a hint for a very specific room, more on that later. So, the Psychic Shockwave, you can equip it by pressing the select button, allowing you to swap between it and the dagger. Or I think you can press start and the right button, but that just takes too long. It is a weaker weapon than the dagger. It's the exact same strength as the axe was. But it has a higher rate of fire, so it's ultimately the better weapon for now. But as we get more and more upgrades to either it or our main weapon, we will be swapping between them basically as the main as we go. What is interesting, though, is that some enemies are programmed to respond to the two different weapon types in different ways. So there are situations where it is better to just swap to the what seems to be weaker weapon in whatever case. And I appreciate that. I often find in games like this, just adventure games and action-adventure games, period, that there's a lot of times where equipment you get at some point just kind of falls by the wayside in lieu of new equipment you get. Zelda games are very guilty of this with their dungeon items, especially during the GameCube and 64 era. And to see a game try to do stuff with that as early as this is nice. Plus, there's some enemies that are just completely immune to either the psychic shockwave or the physical weapon types, so you'll actively have to swap to it no matter what. It's nice to see. This room, though, introduces a new mechanic. You can see that yellow platform there. Not only can you walk off that platform, I believe, into the bottomless pit, as opposed to the normal ground, whenever you step on one of those via a jump, it spawns the next in the sequence, and you need to jump from one to the other to usually reach the end point. There's a couple of points where you can do some shenanigans to skip some of them, or they're just there to get you to an item. But for the most part, you're going to have to use them as your way forward whenever you see them. On that note, and this is somewhat tangential, I should note that I'm not grabbing every item in every dungeon because there's some potions that are so far out of the way to get that it's not worth the time I would use to get them. I'd probably take more damage and use more potions to get the one. So, yeah, keep your eye out for that, I guess. And now for another thing this game likes to do, make you fall into invisible pits to get to the next part of the dungeon. Whenever you fall into a bottomless pit, though, like that, I recommend holding left or right because it actively does make you fall left or right and usually avoid another bottomless pit directly below the one you just fell into. That's more relevant later on, admittedly, like chapter 5 or 6 in particular, but it's worth noting all the same. Also, be careful of spikes. They are also instant kill. Like with most bottomless pit hazards, you can't walk off the normal ground into them, but you can walk off things like these conveyor belt platforms that just send you in the direction their arrow is pointing. But you can usually resist the conveyor belts at least by just jumping into them over and over and over again. By and large, StarTropics 2 doesn't do anything uber spectacular in the platforming department. It's more so the blend of action and platforming it has that's rather unique for the console it's on. Honestly, something I'm kind of surprised about, though, in that regard. We haven't really seen many outright StarTropics-inspired games over the years, have we? Like, we see so many games inspired by the NES library, particularly usually Mega Man, Mario, Castlevania, and Zelda. I can't actively think of a StarTropics-inspired game. I can think of one particular project, and that's a particular fan who owns the domain StarTropics.com, has been working on apparently a fan-made third entry for some time. I'm not sure what the current status is of that. It might even be abandoned at this point. But that's like the closest thing I can think of. Now, that there was a 1-up sign. They are random in how they work. Whenever you pick one up, it'll either give you no lives, 1 life, or 2 lives. I don't remember if it's in this game or the first game, but I've heard that those signs can also make you lose a life without actively killing you. But I'm not sure if that's a thing in this game. It does sound like something StarTropics 1 would do, and honestly it's been forever since I last played it, so I don't quite remember if it happens in that game at all to begin with. Last time I played it was when I did the original LP, which at this point, yeah, that was uploaded about 5 years ago, but that was probably recorded closer to like 5.5, 6 years ago at this point. With how my backlog was at that point in time. Also, this room is one that very easily highlights the thing I brought up before, where you can't actively walk into bottomless pits unless you can. Conveyor belts, platforms you can jump on, and a particular platform type down the line you can just completely walk up off of, and you need to be careful. Now, something I'm not too sure about with the game is the time span of certain items respawning, because occasionally you'll come across a panel, step on it, and if the dungeon design loops back into itself later, sometimes you can get that item again. Like I think in this room in particular, you can get those 2 hearts at least twice. But I'm not exactly sure what causes that. I'm not sure if it's only specific ones it can happen to begin with, or if it's just like you need to have gone away a certain amount of screens, period, and there's just some places you can't backtrack to do that with. Mysteriously snake-shaped room. I'm sure that's not important whatsoever. We'll come back to this room in a few moments when it's actually notable. For now, we just need to move on past it. Just keep in mind what that snake said outside the pyramid a few minutes back. It might be important. The birdmen, which I forget which god that resembles from general hieroglyphs. I forget if it's Ra or Sekhmet or someone else. They're the most dangerous enemy here, only because they have a lot more range with their attacks than most others do, because they aim directly for you with the projectiles. Because a lot of other enemies in the game, you really can just stay in one place and try to hit-stun them to death from a diagonal vantage point, and you'll have no problem. It's either those enemies that are annoying, or the ones that are very fast, like these baby mummies. Now, this room's pretty important, because once we defeat all the enemies to open the door, we can step on this panel to open this chest to grab ourselves a flute. Now, you might remember what the snake outside the pyramid said about hearing a lovely tune, so from there, I think you can figure out what we have to do. We need to go back to that snake room and use the flute to unlock the real way forward. If there's anything I can say about StarTropics 2, it doesn't really have any real head-scratchers for its puzzles. There's maybe some trial and error-based puzzles, but there's none that are kneeling down at a specific cliff to use a crystal to have a tornado pick you up kind of deals, you know? This game is pretty straightforward with what it wants you to do at all points in time. If anything, the biggest brain twister this game tends to have is towards the end game, the dungeons do get pretty big with multiple floors, and you actively have to search for the way through instead of some of the earlier game dungeons, which even to this point are still relatively linear. But even then, like, as if you're drawing your own map, those puzzles aren't going to be much of a puzzle to begin with. It's just figuring out which rooms you haven't been to yet, probably. Wait, no, there is actually one type of brain twister this game has in only a couple of places. Now that we have the psychic shockwave, there are some doors that will only open if you attack certain parts of the wall. In most cases, those lead to just potions, but there are a couple of cases where you need to do that to progress, and that's a little annoying. We'll see those, I think, starting in chapter 4 or 5, I want to say. But now, if memory serves, we're coming up on the boss fight. I won't even waste any of your time trying to fight the mummies. Conserve your health as best you can. Boss fight here is a pharaoh's head, who's going to swing to the left and right, kind of going in a wavy motion. And once it reaches the extreme, it'll start rotating its face to fire some spread shot-like projectiles. If you're real fast about mashing the psychic shockwave, though, you can kill this boss fight pretty quickly. I'd say the first boss, if you're good at mashing, that can be really hard, is something from the next chapter. More so than anything up to this point. Wow, we've done it! We're stuck in a pyramid now. Huzzah! We will now die here and just be found by future archaeologists. But hey, we also got ourselves a tetrad. That's number 2! And of course, our life will also increase from doing that. I do wish that the health didn't have to slowly refill every time your health restored, but oh well. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're moving on to chapter 4 to see where in time we head next. See you guys then.